So the focus for this particular call today is managing your team's performance. Recognizing that, if you're going to build a business that is repeatable and predictable and especially, scalable, that means
still have this in the document?
reliable, predictable performance out of the people that you're working with. And they need to be projecting your brand in a consistent and effective and accurate way. And they need to be following whatever protocols and procedures you have for the business. What we find in talking with so many people is that that's a bit of a challenge to manage sometimes, that we don't have everybody contributing to the business in the way that we would like them to. So we're going to talk this particular month a little bit about managing the performance of these folks. So since we have a small group here, I was going to actually ask everybody to put stuff in the chat, but since we have a relatively small group, I'd like to just ask each of you in turn, what's one challenge that you have in managing the performance or contribution of some people on your team? And I'm not just talking about like how somebody handles objections or how somebody, closes somebody or pitches compass. Think of everybody that works with you. How do they attend? Do they attend meetings on time and in the way they should? Do they participate in meetings the way they should? Do they develop their own skills in an organized and planned and purposeful way so that they can grow their capability to create the impact that you're looking for? Or is there some other way that they're contributing to the business that you're really not 100% comfortable with and would like to be able to shift? So I'd like to hear from each of you. Just contribute one thing that you see on your team regarding how people perform and contribute that is a bit of a struggle for you to manage. So who'd like to go first?
I mean, I guess I'll go, but
Go ahead, Stacy. What's
I
one
feel,
thing? that comes up
I
on
feel
your
like
team?
my team is all the stuff you said, like get into meetings, represent my value proposition, do all the things, come to all the continuing ed, are real champions of the team that we got down. Like for sure, there's nobody that isn't.
Mhm.
I guess my one challenge that I've never done, and I just trying to say I'm never going to do really is but I'm not sure this is right, is like, I don't give out business based on their production per se. It's more about fit for the client. So I'm not great at tracking like which lead should go to what client, what team member based on how much they brought in. That's something I'm bad at, and I'm bad at managing. And the other thing that I struggle with a little is that like a lot of them talk about wanting like a personal brand, which I'm all for, but then they don't do the things that they need to do it. Like I'll be like, okay, so let's talk about videos that you want to do for you, and then they want the business, they want to do it, but then they don't want to do it. And I always think that's what separates us from them, and that's fine. And there's a reason we're the team leaders, but that's one struggle I have, that I've just said, if you're not going to do it, you're not going to do it. That means you're not going to bring in the business,
All right, perfect. That's a great example. Thank you. Let's hear from someone else. What's a challenge that you have in managing how your people perform or contribute to the team's success? Who's next? Josh, please.
Following up on goal setting and managing that on a regular basis with regular check-ins on progress or lack thereof. And so right now I'm reading the book Traction and considering something called the EOS, which is an entrepreneurial operating system to help with our alignment and goals, et cetera, and measuring data. But we don't have, like, we do the goal setting thing, and we do the check-ins, and like we sort through issues and solve problems, but like it's not happening and functioning in the way that it should, right? Like if somebody's like, oh, I'm not making enough money, like we'll talk about like what are some of the things that you can do, but we're not like measuring the metrics on a weekly or monthly basis of like, oh, you're behind by these few deals, so you should be, time to pivot and increase the business production time or focus or blah, 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 blah. So it's a little too fly by the seat of your pants. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Let's hear from someone else. What's a challenge that you see on your team? Fran, please.
A little bit of what Josh is saying and a little bit of what Stacy's saying and a little more. I find that my team, we're all aligned, same thing. They come to the meetings, I say we should take this class, they take the class, we do this, they're all on board with it, but they don't work the way I work, and it drives me crazy. And I know I have to let them work the way they work, but then when you don't see results, I want to say, but you got to do it this way. And so I struggle with, they're independent contractors, and I can't tell a millennial how to do it. And I can't tell someone has 10 years experience and been doing it. Like, I want to tell them, but from all the coaching I learned, you can't make someone do it the way you want to do it. So that's what I struggle with, because now is a hard time because the results are very difficult, and business is definitely, slow and on off, at least here. And I usually just hand out all the leads, and now it's like, everybody's got to like step it up. So
Can you just give us, thank you. I think everybody can relate to what you're saying, but I'd like to hear if you can give us one specific example of what you'd like them to be doing that you can't get them to do and you can't tell them to do.
Okay, so a couple of things. So let's say a call comes in, I give it out, I say, okay, do it. And like 30 minutes later, or like if we're all in the office, I'll say, oh, what did that person want? What did they like? Oh, you know what? I'm going to call them later when I get, back home and situated. I'll just call them now. Like I'm very like responsive, and I feel like on this team, I feel like they have their appointments and they have their personal stuff. And in my world, I always put work first. Maybe that's a problem. That's why I have no hobbies, because I always put work first. This is the problem. They have a life. I really don't.
Yeah.
But it drives me insane. So that would be one. And then just like the same thing, like we're sending out this massive mailing, and like I did mine 1, 2, 3, call the woman, do this, RSP. And like one of them is like, okay, I'm going to call her in the morning. I'm like, just do it. Like it's that. It's just that kind of stuff.
Let's
Sounds
hear
like
from
kids.
the rest, please. Tracy?
I said, that sounds like just having kids. You tell them to do something, they're like, oh, I'll do
Sure.
it later.
Well, there's certainly parallels. What is
Yeah.
it for you that comes up, Tracy, when we think about this?
I'm pretty happy with what everybody's doing. So I'm not really struggling with anything. And the only thing I'm struggling with is, and I can't change it, is the other agent on my team is battling cancer, and I can't push.
Got it.
So that's just got to be whatever she can manage to do. That's what she's going to do.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Well, that's okay. In this case, I mean, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that. Secondly, for our conversation, it's perfectly appropriate. There are times when people have to adjust their level of performance, and maybe they are sick with something, or maybe there's something going on in their family. That's still part of performance management. Absolutely. All right. Thank you. Who's left? Margot, Brad, and Jillian. What comes up for you on your team in terms of this?
Margot's in the chat.
Oh, Margot's in the chat.
Yeah, she doesn't want to talk in front of the people.
Okay, got it. Yeah, okay. So let's see what Margot had to say. I'm going to type for now because there's 2 agents. The biggest challenge is motivation and doing the things they need to do, not the idea of the day that is not moving the needle forward. Okay, got it. Yep. So it's like staying focused on the things that really they need to be focused on, rather than getting distracted by some idea of the day or latest and greatest, something to catches their eye and attention. Are we hearing that right, Margot? Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Let's hear from Brad and from Jillian, please.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with everyone. It's funny we're on this topic. I sat my team down yesterday, and I think as a whole, you look at how business is, and when business gets challenging, everyone looks at the leader, right? And for me, I've struggled with holding them to the expectations that I give them, right? I mean, and again, maybe y'all can speak to how often you're meeting with individual agents, but I don't do that enough. But I think, I told them yesterday, we will be having basically a meeting every other week, and we're going to go through expectations like lead flow. Your lead flow will be turned off if you're not doing your daily activities, right? And I feel like sometimes, and y'all are probably the same way, too nice, right? Like at the end of the day, you're still a business owner, and you got to hold these people to these expectations, or or at least the people I have on my team, they're kind of okay with this, right? Where I tell everybody we need to be constantly going like this. And that's what I struggle is really just how to communicate those expectations. And then if they don't do what they're supposed to do, what do I do? Do I fire them? Do I put them on a performance plan? That's what I'm struggling with today.
Got it. Thank you. All right. And Jillian.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of in the same boat here. And I think it's a little tough at this particular moment in time. I mean, for Boston, August, July is quiet most, most cycles anyways. It's real quiet right now. So it's like, as much as I'm like, yes, like follow up. It's like, I know where all your clients are. They're where all my clients are. So they're on the Cape, they're in Newport, they're in Nantucket, they're not paying attention. So it's like, I feel that there's definitely more I could be doing in this downtime to sort of prepare for fall. And I sort of offered ideas, but I'm not seeing like a ton of follow through from my team and reaching out to their people and sort of making use of this quiet time. And then I'm also like, I'm not making the best use out of this time. So what can I say? It's tough. But how can I get mad at somebody else for not taking the advice I'm not taking myself? But yeah.
Thank you, Josh.
I had checked in with one of my team members last week, and this made me think about what Stacy was saying about how sometimes team members are like, I want to do this marketing thing or grow my brand or whatever. And sometimes something happens, but often not. So I was meeting with my colleague Morgan, and we were talking about social media or whatever ideas. And then at the end of that conversation, I said, okay, well, how about you do these 2 post ideas that we just talked, and gave it a deadline. And that changed everything. It was like not unattainable, right? It was like, okay, you'll do these 2 reels, and here's the 2 topics that we discussed that you want to do. And the key differentiator between like a lot of my normal check-ins and this one is like, you think you can have that done by Friday or Monday? Yes. Next day I noticed one was up. And then, so that can sometimes be the missing piece on execution of like a deadline.
What I find is a lot of times is exactly what Josh is talking about is we aren't truly aligned. We don't have specificity for what the expectations are. We come from the assumption that we're a professional and they're a professional. And so we should just we assume that they know what they're doing, and we kind of let it go at that. And so same thing with Fran. She said, oh, well, somebody comes in and they call with something from in somebody's world, it's okay to call back when they get home and they get organized. In Fran's world, it's why wait, right? Did we talk about, we've talked about icebergs before, right? I don't know if we've talked about icebergs since Tracy and Brad have been around. Have we heard us talk about icebergs before?
I haven't heard you guys talk about it, but I've heard about it in other situations.
For you guys, just so we all have the same language here. Hold on. I have like 25 different versions of this. I probably need to put one together just for you guys. Okay, this should work. Let me pull this up. So the idea of icebergs is thinking about how we process information and what we pay attention to as individuals. And this work comes out of cultural anthropology, where cultural anthropologists look at individuals and they look at groups of individuals. We call them societies, you could call them a team, you could call them a culture. And essentially what they're saying is that when you look at a particular culture, you can see certain things on the outside that are reflective of that culture. For example, Stacy was just in Italy. She sees certain ingredients that they put in their foods, and they have a certain type of cuisine. Or They board buses or they drive in certain ways in Italy, then in Rome, maybe that's either similar or different from New York City, for example. And so these are elements of the culture that we can observe from the outside, but we're not necessarily clear why they're done that way. So for example, in New York, when you get on the subways, it's hard to get people to like get into the car and move to the center of the car. Like they kind of hang out by the door. And so even though it's crowded out on the platform, there's often room in the middle of the car. And anybody who's ridden New York subways knows that. And you're like, can you step in, please? And then if you say that, half of them won't do anything. The other half will like reluctantly move a step or two in so more people can get on. If you go to Tokyo or something, everybody knows everybody around them is trying to get on the train and they pack in much more tightly. So these are elements of culture that we can observe. But when we think about like, where do those things come from? That begins this conversation around icebergs. And so what we say about icebergs is, if you apply icebergs to not just cultures, but to individuals, what you see is, as you know, an iceberg floats in such a way that 90% of it's below the water and only 10% of it's above the water. The density of the ice is more than the water generally. And so when you see an iceberg, what you're seeing is a small piece of all that's there. And when you look at an individual, the same thing, you're seeing a small piece of all that's there for that particular individual. So you break this down into what we call the visible sense, the visible self, which is what you see. And mostly that's clothing, language, and behaviors. But underneath all that is a whole bunch of other stuff. Beliefs about the world, our values, our judgments, our assumptions, how we view time, how we solve problems, how we make decisions, what we feel and think about risk and trust and logic, professionalism, all those things are underneath. And so when we start working with another person or another group of people, we're looking across at another human being and we're saying, I can't believe that person thought that that was the right way to handle this particular situation. Like Fran just showed us her exasperation. Like if the client called us, call them back, right? And it makes perfect sense to Fran, and it's frustrating because she sees somebody else not following it. And for all of what you shared here, we can have some level of frustration or confusion about why somebody is behaving in a certain way that's different from what we would expect or what we would think is right or what we would do personally. What really happens is these two people are working together. They both have the same types of items underneath their iceberg, but for each person, it's totally unique because of our background, where we grew up, what kind of messages came to us, how we interpreted our experiences. All these things create a unique iceberg underneath all of us. And the actions that we take don't come out of the blue. They're not perfectly random. They come out of somewhere. Where they come out of is all the stuff that's underneath the iceberg. Because I believe that professionalism looks like this, that's why I behave the way I did. Because I think that luxury service equals this, therefore I behave the way that I did. That goes to showing up on time or not for meetings. It goes to contributing to meetings or not. It goes to paying attention or not. It goes to whether you think you need to improve yourself or not. It goes to whether you're going to respond quickly to a client request or not. It goes to how quickly you'll respond to a colleague's request or not. It goes to how integrated you feel you need to be as an outside sales agent for a company that you're not actually employed by. And what does that mean in terms of your commitment to that particular team? And this issue about setting up their own brand, they want to have their own brand, but they don't want to make the effort. All this stuff that we observe is coming out of their icebergs, right? This is where the behaviors come from. The challenge that we have is when we look across at somebody else's behavior, it doesn't make sense to us because we're trying to understand the behavior that we observe through the filter of our own iceberg, right? Fran is looking at that person and she's saying, why don't you call him back? Because in her world, she just said it, business comes first, right? That's a belief that she holds that runs through her life and runs through her business. Business comes first. If you have to call back the client anyway, why wait? That's the belief that's underneath there for her. And so it makes perfect sense. The problem, of course, is that nobody's iceberg is the same as ours. And so what comes along with what we observe is our judgment about what we observe. And this is why we experience frustration or anger or something like that. And so when we talk about icebergs here, we're talking about each person having their unique set of stuff, all this stuff underneath. It all matters. Your beliefs about what professionalism is, about your beliefs about what service looks like, your values, your assumptions, your judgments, your ideas about trust and logic and relationship, and all those things are in there. And they're always operating. They're always guiding behaviors. And so when we're talking about managing performance, what we're talking about is one human being working together or living together with another human being trying to find a way that we can accommodate those differences in our icebergs. And it's really hard. It's much more easy to fly by the seat of our pants, but it can also be frustrating. It's much more easy to just kind of let it go and not set those clear expectations that Josh was talking about. And so what we need to do is reach alignment with that other person about what matters the most, of course. And of course, often we don't. You know, if somebody calls in and you're just expecting that person to call back to the client immediately, they don't see it that way. And so your expectation is simply coming out of your iceberg. And so a lot of the frustration that we have is simply nothing more than our icebergs talking, our icebergs saying one thing and somebody else is saying another. And so if you're going to choose to be in business with somebody else on the planet, and it doesn't matter who it is, you're going to have to navigate these differences. And by the way, for anyone who's ever been married or in a long-term relationship, same thing. If you have kids, the iceberg issue comes up all the time because one of you says we should be harder on the kid. The other says, no, we need to be easier on the kid. Or somebody says, oh, let's buy him some ice cream. No, we got to give him healthier food. You know, let's enroll him in sports. No, it's too dangerous, right? The iceberg stuff comes up every single day when you're raising kids because you have to make those decisions. And so when we're talking about performance management, what we're talking about is having a good awareness of what's underneath our iceberg. And then having an awareness of what's underneath their iceberg and being able to navigate the discussion about how can we possibly reach a space of commonality here. It doesn't mean that everybody has to agree on everything, but it does mean certain things. For example, if you insist on your people showing up for the CSC calls at 9:30 on Mondays, fine, that's a non-negotiable for you. Or if you insist on having those one-on-one conversations every other week, that's a non-negotiable for you. Right? Where we often get into trouble is that we're not quite clear enough on what it is that we want to expect from everybody. We expect them to be like us. No one's ever going to be like us. And so we have to navigate this difference. And that's where it becomes difficult to do because we're not necessarily trained to do this. You guys are trained to talk with anybody looking to buy or sell a house and do it well for them. And yet you're all saying you struggle to actually navigate the business space to have challenging conversations too. It's different. They're kind of different conversations. And almost nobody has any kind of perfect training for this kind of thing. I mean, I've coached people in Fortune 500s and small businesses all around the world. Everybody struggles with it. Americans tend to struggle with it more because we have trouble around the emotions that come up when we discuss things that are not easy for us. And that makes it more difficult. And so what do we normally do? We shy away. We just kind of let it go. We hope it gets better. You know, 90% of the time, the idea is, I don't want to deal with it. If I just let it go, if I just give a little hint here or there, maybe they'll get better at it and I won't have to deal with it in the future, right? That's 90% of the time what we do. But there are some things that we can do here. And I wanted to suggest a couple things to think about just to see, you know, what you guys think about them. And some may be really useful to some of you, some may not, and that's perfectly fine. But one of the things that we found is really useful to people is something that's done a lot in the corporate world, which is called 10-10-30-30. 10-10-30-30 is a very simple framework for having discussions with your team members about performance, not about the deals that they happen to be working on. 10-10-30-30 means having a 10-minute conversation every 10 days and a 30-minute conversation every 30 days. 10-minute conversation every 10 days is a conversation about what are they doing or what are they focusing on to maximize their performance in the business. Is it they're working on something that they heard about in a CSC playbook call? Or is it they're reading a book right now and they're thinking about how to apply that to how they communicate with clients or colleagues? Or they're working on, I don't know, contributing in a more useful way during meetings, right? It's they have something in mind that they're focusing on. You can imagine a golfer or a gymnast or a skier, every time they go out, they are thinking about something, right? The golfer is thinking about the hand or the angle of their feet or the angle of their hips or how much they turn their shoulders, or the gymnast is thinking of twisting faster or a higher dismount or whatever, right? They've always got something on their mind that they're working on. Unfortunately, in the professional world, only some people do that. A lot of people don't. They're just in the business. They're doing the best they can with whatever's in front of them, but they're not thinking about how to bring themselves to the business and grow themselves. And so the 10-10-30-30 allows you, if you set up some kind of a process ahead of time where it's expected that everybody be working on something for their own, development, and you've had some kind of conversation, I could talk about that in a minute. but that you're checking in with them every 10 days or so to say, how's that going? Well, you know, this book I read 2 weeks ago said, blah, blah, blah. You should try this next time you're working with a client. And I tried that on my client yesterday. Oh, great. How did it go? It was a disaster. Okay, great. Why was it a disaster? Well, X, Y, Z, right? And so you're working on the particular aspect of their contribution that's not tied to necessarily the work itself, but tied to how they're trying to participate and grow their participation or value contribution. That's the 10-minute conversation. The 30-minute conversation is different in nature. The 30-minute conversation, again, is not focused on this particular deal or that particular deal, or where's the contract, or what's happening with the inspection. The 30-minute conversation is where you step back from the business a little bit and you speak human to human. How's this job working for you these days? How's it working with your work-life balance? Do you feel like you're getting out of it what it is you want to get out of it? Those kinds of conversations where you're stepping back a little bit from the day-to-day and saying, what's this experience of being part of this when you could do any job in the world and you chose to do this at this particular time? How's that working for you? Or what else is going on in your life? Is somebody dealing with cancer in your family? Did your dog die? Did you just get a new dog? Are you expecting a new baby? These are great opportunities to connect with these folks as human beings and talk about what's going on in their life, to A, connect, and B, for you to understand what's going on in their life and what matters to them. Because that's going to influence whatever their performance level is and whatever their kind of commitment to focusing on growing themselves will be over the near future. So the 10-10-30-30 method is a process that allows you, without any dollar spend, unless you want to take them out to lunch, and without a whole lot of time, 30 minutes every 30 days is not too much to spend when you're talking about the 3 or 4 or 5 most important people that you work with 50 hours a week, is one particular method. Has anybody applied that at all? Because I know we've shared this with some people in the past. Has anybody done something like this or done this consciously with your team? Okay, somebody mentioned before, was it Stacy who said meeting one-on-one every other week?
Yeah, I have one-on-ones with each team member every
Okay.
other week.
How long do those take and what's the purpose of those one-on-ones?
They're 30 minutes each.
Yep.
And I will tell you, they're very unstructured, but I generally leave it for them to share, you know, whatever they need to share. We always talk about the clients they're working with, the listings, if we need a price reduction, what they're struggling with,
Yep, got it.
and what they want to incorporate, like we talk about.
Yep.
Maybe doing a video or, you know, whatever, having lunches and stuff. So it's really for them, and I don't structure it, but we always go through each deal and each action of what they're doing to build business.
All right, got it. Thank you. So that's not what we're talking about here.
Right.
That's what
Emotionally,
99%
we talk all the time. I know everything going on with all of them.
Okay, good. So maybe you're weaving some of that stuff in. The
At
point
all
here is-
times, I'm aware. Yes, no.
The point here is when we're talking about performance management, it's not about what's happening with this deal, what's happening with that deal, what's happening with another deal, right? That's just operations, right?
Yep.
When we're talking about managing performance, yeah, it ties to all that. That's true. But we need to be able to step back from that. If we're just troubleshooting, then we're never really getting to personal growth, right? And obviously troubleshooting is what we do 99% of the time. What we need to do as leaders is remember that we're reserving 1% of that time for something other than the typical day-to-day operational troubleshooting and problem-solving discussions. Absolutely important, necessary, and we want to make sure that we're getting away from that stuff from time to time. Do you guys ever use a development plan for any of your people? A development plan, I mean, this gets back to the specificity that Josh was talking about. A development plan is a simple document created by the two people involved, usually one is a boss, that specifies what it is that the person is going to be focusing on developing over a period of time. It could be a skill, it could be a capacity, it could be a body of knowledge, and then how you're going to go about it. And so it's something that you have a conversation or a couple of conversations about. It's done all the time in the corporate world, which is essentially, how do you want to grow your ability to be more effective in the future? And then you talk about that and you figure out what that's going to look like, and then you put it down on a piece of paper. And in the corporate world, of course, that goes to the HR department. And then, you know, they are kind of watching things over time, and that becomes part of the 10-10-30-30 if you want to do something like that. Let me share with you what a PDP could look like. Now, you could do this for the people who you employ. Absolutely, you should have something like this for the people that you employ. But even the people that are just agents who are ISAs or something, you can still do some version of this. Yes, you can't hold them to it. Yes, you're not their employer. On the other hand, if you're hiring people who are as interested in creating more value in the future as you are, then they should not be, hesitant to have some discussion around this with you. And whether you come up with a clear document like this or not is not so important as aligning on what is it that the person can continue to grow himself towards, him or herself. So let me pull this one up. And you guys could certainly adapt this to your own particular needs or interests. So a personal development plan is just a simple one-page document indicating what it is that you want to focus on over time. Now, somebody mentioned earlier, who was that? I think it was Margot. Yeah, Margot talked about them getting caught up in the idea of the day and not necessarily focusing on the stuff that they should be focusing on. Chirag would say that's focusing on what's urgent rather than important or something like that. And so a document like this PDP helps you think about what the important stuff is that you need to focus on over time. You don't have to do it today. You don't have to do it tomorrow, but over 6 months or a year's time, you better have done it. And so what are the outcomes here that you want to create? Well, I want to become more effective at pitching companies. Fine. I want to learn how to handle, development projects. Fine. Or I want to, I'd like to learn more about how we, negotiation. Could be any of these things. You put a goal over here or an outcome that the person wants to create. And then you list here in the second section, whatever the steps are that they're going to have to take to get there. Maybe it's read such and such a book. Maybe it's meet with Susan, who's in charge of the development part of our business that this person wants to learn more about. Maybe it's meet with Susan monthly. Maybe it's attend some training, right? There could be very specific steps that you put in there for those particular goals. And then there may be some support that you might need from someone on the team. So it might be Susan needs to open her schedule. Maybe you will contribute $500 to the training program, right? This is the support that's coming from the business to the individual. And then the target date could be 12/31. So you've got goal number 1 over here, which let's say is learn about development projects, something like that. Over here could be mastering pitching compass, right? And so you list as many goals as you have. It's usually no more than 2, and it's usually 6 to 12 months of time. And so the point here is you both need to align on what the goals are here. You both have to have the same understanding. If you don't have the same understanding here, the whole thing is off. And that's the same thing that Josh was talking about before. You don't always specify clearly what it is you're actually expecting from somebody. And so they come away with some other different expectation of what that is. And then you both have to align on what the action steps are going to be, because those are the things that that individual needs to do to get there, right? This first column is about the what, let's say, the goal. This is about the how. And then this third column is also important, which is, what does the business need to contribute to make this happen? And then we can agree on whatever the date is. And so it's a very simple document that helps everybody understand what we're trying to do here. And in a sense, it legitimizes whatever it is that you're talking about here. And you can have as many of these as you want. So here's a particular possible one, for example. So if you look at this, 2 simple goals, a bunch of action steps for each, resources needed, and a date. And so if you did this, and most corporations do this at the beginning of the year, beginning of the fiscal year, or January 1st, whatever it is, and they'll say for the next 6 months, we both understand, you and me, the boss, both understand that this is the thing that we want you to work on. And this is what you're going to be doing, and this is how I'm going to be helping you be successful with this. And then we're going to check in 6 months later, 3 months later, whatever it is, but we know that there's a target date involved. So this is a tool that can be used to clarify, align two people around certain objectives. So let me pull this down and ask you guys for your thoughts about this, questions or thoughts. What comes up for you as you look at this?
I love this stuff because it's like tactical and actionable. And I would love to have one for myself. First of all, if you can send that, would be great, but I'd love to
Sure.
actually even have one for myself. My biggest challenge lately is just trying to figure out what the hell I want to work on. Like, what is my goal? I'm goalless right now, other than the production and the numbers. Forget that. That's always a goal.
Yep.
Um,
Not everybody people may not always have something to work on every minute of their life. But, you know, if you have people working for you and with you, they should be working on something at least some percent of the time. And you can see how this becomes the beginning of a 10-10 conversation, set of conversations, right? If you clarify this early in the game, let's say the beginning of the year, let's say, then you're doing your 10-10s along the way. You can be checking in about what part of this is the person working on and how's it going so far? And do we need to make an adjustment in our strategy in some way, for example? Let's hear from someone else. What comes up for you as we discuss this and share these things?
I think it's great because it gives you specific action items for individuals, right? I think for me, at least, something I struggle with is, being pulled 1,000 different directions. Well, with this and your team members, you can find out, number one, what are their goals besides the numbers and figures? Like, for example, social media videos. Fran, y'all are about to shoot all those videos. I preach video to my team and no one does it. I sent out something last week, got 3 leads from a video. I said, here it is on a platter. Nobody did it. But at least with something like this, you make it actionable and you have, and you can track it at specific times. So I think it's great.
Thank you. Who else? What comes up for you?
For me, it's very similar. I like the fact that you can really pull out of not just for yourself, but your team, maybe those things that you think they want to work on, but maybe those aren't the things they want.
Correct.
So, right. So now you really have it on paper and you have an actionable plan that you could check back in on. And it's not just a big broad, every week we get together. So it's always a big broad thing, but we talk about all these things, but this really kind of puts the feet to the fire. Like, okay, here it is. This is what you need. This is what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to give you. Here's the date. So I like it.
It has to be mutual though. You
Right.
can't impose it on somebody because they're not going to follow through. And it's just a waste
Right.
of time, right?
Mhm.
It has to be something that you both come to without coercion. And,
Right.
Some teams will have each person sign it, and that's kind of a formality, but it is saying, I'm willing to give this a shot.
Right.
Now, when you're thinking about performance management, there's kind of 4 steps in the flow. First is goal setting and action steps and all that stuff. Second is monitoring. There needs to be some way that you're observing or monitoring what's going on. And then there's assessment, which is tied to monitoring, right? So like if you said you're going to learn how to do all kinds of, let's say, social media. In January, you're going to learn Instagram. In February, you're going to learn Snapchat. And March, you're going to do whatever. You can monitor that along the way, and then you can assess how we're doing according to the original plan. And then there's the manage part. So it's goals, monitor, assess, manage, right? And so once you've set up what the expectations are, and then you have some way of monitoring it, then you can have a discussion about how you assess how things are going. And you might see it differently from the other person. She might think they're doing great. You might think they're doing okay. But again, that's a discussion. You don't have to call them out. You don't have to tell them they're bad people or evil or whatever. But you can have a discussion about how it's going according to your original expectations. And then that management conversation may mean that you need to change the strategy, or maybe you need to lean on them a little bit to make sure that they're not letting things slip through the cracks or something, right? That's the management piece.
Mhm. Will you send that to us?
Pardon? Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Okay, great.
None of this makes sense without some kind of original alignment around this. And you can understand how hard it is to align on this because of the icebergs, right? Everybody is coming into the business with their own iceberg. You're in this business because you want to make a shit ton of money. Fine. Somebody else, I guarantee you, doesn't. That's not their motivation. Maybe they just love to make great relationships. Maybe they love the thrill of the hunt, but they're not really care about the money so much, or whatever it is, right? Maybe they want to be part of a winning team and they heard you're a good team. If you're not sure what their motivation is, find out. But absolutely their motivation and their iceberg is not necessarily identical to yours. And so if you have clear goals in the beginning, then you say, part of that discussion is, okay, this is what we want to choose. And then these are the action steps. How can we kind of assess how we're doing? Right? If you've ever heard the expression SMART goals are a way of identifying goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant to the rest of the business, and have a time deadline attached to them, which is what Josh was referencing before. If you don't attach a time element to it, then people have different ideas about when it needs to get done, and their actions will be different. And so that's why this PDP that I just showed you, for example, has the target date on there. And so, when you're thinking about what the person needs to be doing, you've specified it ahead of time, you both agreed on it, and then that's like a side kind of work stream for them along with the day-to-day stuff. That's why we need different discussions about it. Most people are just flying by the seat of their pants every day, living the business. But if you really want to grow the value that the business can contribute in the future, you need to grow the value that the individuals can contribute in the future.
Yeah, I think a lot of us struggle with the same issues that we're venting around our team members, in that, like, that real estate agent mentality of like, oh, I gotta do this, I gotta do that, I gotta do this. And so this is a powerful document and a helpful tool, but like, we also, like, you have to think about ourselves and what we're accountable and responsible to do. And that means, like, we have to exercise the discipline to show up consistently. If you do this document with this document and bring it back to that, like, and like, it's on us, right? And so if we, as, let's call it managers, not team leaders, like, if we want to help somebody grow and develop, then none of that happens unless we are showing up at the meeting with the document of like checking in on these goals, which, sounds like it's a growth area for all of us. So there's definitely a lot to think about and execute on there of like, how do we show up, like the follow through on this. And if, not to complicate it, but like, to take it a step further of like, something could have a goal to be done of end of December, but what are we looking for at that 10/10 inflection point? Like, how are we, maybe there's an opportunity to like have one more column of like, here's the biweekly goal of, you do one coffee with one of your people in your network every
Right.
10 days. And then by the end of this, you're going to have accomplished your goal of doing more networking or relationship building. I don't know. So,
Correct.
but it's on us. Like, it's totally, like, I could vent about, things that come up all the time, but I don't always show up the way I need to. So, yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up. It's really important. One interesting parallel to this is, imagine a budget. The budget you set at the beginning of the year, and you track that all year long. If I were to ask you, how's your business doing according to the budget, you'd probably all be able to tell me you know exactly where it is. This is essentially the same thing. It's a development budget in a sense. You're setting it ahead of time. You're clear about what it is. You know what needs to happen to get there. And then that becomes the framework or the basis for the conversations that you'll have throughout the year to check in. And whether you go with 10/10 or 15/15, some businesses do 5/5, 5/5/30/30, 5-minute conversation every 5 days. Just check in. What'd you do this week? What are you doing next week? Okay, got it. Have a nice weekend. And that works for some people. That works for some organizations. You don't have to do it the same with everybody. And you may not want to apply this to everybody in your business. You could start by picking one person in your business that you think would be amenable to a process like this, and have the conversations to create the PDP together. And then part of that conversation is, okay, this is what we think we want to do this year, and this is the steps that you need to do it. How do we feel about checking in with each other once every 2 weeks about this, or once a month about this? Maybe it's just 30/30 and that's it. And if that's what works for both of you, given the content of the goals and the way that you work, perfectly fine. The point is you have a defined process for checking on this stuff. And this is stuff we rarely do in business. Unfortunately, we rarely do it in our marriage either, right? How often do you sit down with your honey and you say, how's it going? Right? We said this year we were going to work on how we listen to each other. How are we doing with that? We don't have those conversations very often. But imagine the value if you can get people to buy into an ongoing discussion of how to create more contribution exponentially over time. Your business improves its ability to produce only through the ability of the people to produce. Yes, there's value in technology and other stuff too, but essentially it's up to the people to be able to produce more. And so how do you make sure that you're in a dialogue, an ongoing dialogue, individually and collectively, certainly, about how to create more, productivity, more output? And yes, absolutely, Stacy. This is why many corporations do it. It makes it much easier for them to let somebody go when they haven't hit the expectations. It's all documented. It's all clear. In many businesses, large businesses especially, if you set these goals ahead of time and the person is really floundering over time, they'll put that person on kind of a special status where they'll get the HR person involved and they'll create another kind of more specific things like we're going to
Professional improvement plan.
It's like an improvement plan. That's correct.
Yeah.
Well, they'll do that for 3 months or 6 months. And if the person doesn't cut the mustard by the end of that, they're gone. And it's all documented. And so it's easy. It inoculates them from, lawsuits and stuff, inoculates them from losing a lawsuit. It doesn't inoculate them from having one. But yes, it's absolutely a very easy tool to use for a purpose like that. So I'm happy to send this particular document out to everybody. There are some other columns you could put in here. Absolutely. One column would be, how often do we want to check in and assess how we're doing? So if it's a longer goal, that's like a 6-month goal or a 12-month goal, right? See you, Margot. Thanks for being with us. If it's a 6-month goal or a 9-month goal, you can just put down on a paper, monthly 30-minute conversations to check in on progress. That's it. And then you just put them in your calendar. It's all scheduled out for the year. You're done. So that's another column you could add easily. Or not, it's really up to you, but you can use this as a basis and work from here. I'd be happy to talk with any of you or all of you at any time if you want to kind of delve into this further or just explore some things. So if it's helpful to you, reach out to me. I'm happy to have a phone call about it. So give some thought to the PDP, give some thought to a 10-10-30-30 or 5-5-30-30, what might work for you. And happy to continue the conversation. We'll talk more about this on our next peer group call. You guys can explore. So give it some thought and you'll have something to share with the others when we have the next peer group. All right. Any final questions or comments before we go?
Nope.
No, see you guys.
All right. All good, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the month. We'll see you on our next call.
See ya.
All right,
Bye-bye.
Stacy. All right, see you.